Healthy Hustle, the new blueprint to thrive in business and life. That is the title of the book that Nicky and Ness have written, which we all have our little copies of here that we were just flashing up before. Ness disappears when she shows hers. But this is a really exciting topic. I'm so glad to have the authors joining me today on the podcast. And obviously, we're still in the start of the year, and really what better way to kind of kick our brains into gear than to sit down and start by getting, a cup of tea, take a deep breath, and really, in many respects, calm down, because part of this conversation is about saying that we're not having to deny who we are or that we're ambitious or have goals, but it really is a conversation about that pause and reflection and being really intentional as we go into 2025. So thank you both for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Really great. And I was so thankful that you sent me down a physical copy of the book in advance. I have many scribbles and notes all over it. So we'll see how to the point we can be. But one of the big things for me in thinking about today's conversation was where to even start, because there really is so much that you cover in the book. And I'm very conscious of wanting to make sure that in this conversation we stay in the ground that you referred to as beautiful chaos, not destructive chaos, right? So while we will jump around a lot and we are going to cover many topics, I'll attempt to keep us in the beautiful chaos space.
I love that. Yes, yes.
There was so in the book here, let me find this section. There's a lovely description that you give around beautiful chaos. So you say, it's a known fact that business is chaotic at times, and sometimes that's okay. In fact, it can be an important part of the healthy hustle. It's the beautiful chaos that's often the impetus for massive action. It's what gives us energy and inspiration to keep going, try new things, and work towards being the best we can be. Beautiful chaos is energy, growth, riding the wild side and seeing where it takes us. But there's a fine line between beautiful and destructive chaos. And I was wondering if you could really just kick us off by telling us a little bit about who this book is for and what those patterns were that you were seeing that led you to kind of feel like we need to write this book and share it.
I love hearing our words being read back to us. I just want to say before we kick into that. So who this book is for, this book, well, we could argue that this book is for everybody that's in this modern age. Primarily, we have written this book for busy business owners, CEOs, founders, leaders, business decision makers who feel like they're caught in the busy trap. They've had a level of success already. They know what it's like to lead, run, own, create a successful business. They've grown their teams, they've grown revenue, they've grown clients, they understand their market, and yet something just isn't quite working for them. The thought of doing it for another 5, 10, 20 years is exhausting. They're sacrificing time for themselves with their loved ones. They're potentially tipping over into destructive chaos, which leads to negative or chronic stress. They're not prioritizing their health. And there's this crossroads where they start to think, you who are watching and listening, you might be thinking, there's got to be a better way. Is it all even worth it? Can I keep doing it? But you don't want to leave and walk away from what you have already created because you're driven, determined, you want to succeed. And I think the patterns that we see and what has led us to write this book is that we have each had our own experience. For myself with burnout as I climbed the corporate ladder and had all the things going on. For Ness, it was more around entrepreneurial addiction while she was building a business with young kids. And over the years, and we've been coaches and facilitators we've had our own coaching and facilitating business separate to this for over a decade. So we've seen those patterns of behavior, not just within ourselves and our own experience, but within other individuals, businesses, corporate, small business, and the patterns of success that actually people get to this crossroad, which is really natural because we have to hustle hard and potentially in a bit of an unhealthy way to reach a certain level of success. But then to go, well, what's the switch and how can I continue to grow, continue to succeed, but in a healthier, better way? So this book for us was really about distilling the knowledge that we both have over the last, not just decade, but couple of decades, to go, how can we put this in a blueprint that people can identify with, relate with, and a simple way to move out of that place? And what I love about what you said, Bessi, was that there's so much in this book, and yet it's not a really big, heavy book to read. It's pretty easy to read. It's quick.
Very readable. Yeah.
It's not huge. And again, that was deliberate. What's just the essential bits to make sure that change can be created.
I think too that's possible because of who you described as the audience, which is the same type of established leaders that I'm working with. The basics are there. They've even usually had significant chapters of their working life where they have had that momentum and they have been in a really good place of flow. So it's not the teaching of the basics, it's the reminding and giving those both the practical tools, but also just allowing us to relax a little bit, that we're not doing something wrong. You are going to go through those different phases.
For people who have achieved a level of success in their business through doing the hustle kind of way, there can be a fear that comes up around, but if I change it, if I take my foot off the accelerator, does that mean business is going to stumble? Am I going to see less profit? Am I going to have to work harder? So when we talk about who this book is for, what the promise in the book is, that these are the structures, the blueprint, the system that we see works for people who have had a level of success but now don't want to compromise their lives and their health for success in the business. So the business can continue to grow, it can continue to be profitable, and you can continue to have an amazing team and get your life back. And that is so important, because what we have seen on the flip of that with the people that we talk about who perhaps have gone too far down the burnout path and are either at or experienced burnout or on their way to, is that what they feel like doing is just walking away and giving up. That's not okay in our world. When we know that
That's such a shame, isn't it, when they've already invested so much and poured themselves into it. Yep.
Absolutely.
And yet it is understandable that people get there. Like it truly is.
100%.
Because I've certainly been there from reading the book. I know that you guys have been there, that you can get to that place where it's just like all too hard, and that's why people burn it down.
Yes.
Yes, we don't want that.
No, and that's the lovely thing, is to actually acknowledge the need to support established leaders in this way and show that there is a different way you can do things. Because as you said, there is that pattern and to some extent components that are both necessary to build something originally, but also I would argue, particularly for those of us who were younger when we started our businesses, there's just a reality about what you have found energizing. After a few decades, it's actually no longer energizing. And I was saying to someone yesterday, I've reached a point where not only do I not have the energy, like I couldn't act like I used to if I wanted to, I also don't want to. Like, do you know what I mean? So there's sort of this mix of things that happen, which I think is part of why people like yourselves and me working with more and more people in this space is because we've all got to that age where we're going, I can't and don't want to do that anymore. So the curiosity of something like Healthy Hustle, where it's still not telling someone you can't be that driven, motivated person, but it's saying, let's figure out how to do this in a more sustainable way, is really important.
Absolutely. And I think that's the differentiating factor there, is that even in doing this work and writing the book and doing the research and even the research for the TEDx talk that I did recently as well, I found that there's two different conversations. Move away from the hustle is ick, forget the hustle, or push hard, hustle, don't sleep. But what's the middle ground? And I think that that's a really good metaphor question for us to ask in all areas of our lives. It's very easy to go to the extremes or the varying spectrums, but it's coming back to what actually is the middle ground. What if we could keep the hustle? Because it's not the hustle that's the problem, it's hustle culture that has become the problem and has gone too far. So I think that's a big question in a lot of areas. What's that middle ground that we can come to?
Yeah. And it's where I do think that there is going to be a need for people to prepare themselves that this might feel incredibly unnatural and awkward or difficult at first to even pause. Like, I remember a few years ago when I was part of an amazing mastermind, and I was in the US once a quarter, and it was back when I first had the intense experience of menopause hitting very hard. And a friend gave me this great book called Wintering that was talking about, I don't know if you've read it, good book if you haven't. But anyway, so it was talking about these different seasons and thresholds, and not having to think that it's natural and should always be a season of growth or, expansion. And there was a woman in the US, and she was heading off to some beautiful island to have a relaxing holiday and was asking for book recommendations. So I recommended this book. And then when she was away, she sent me a text like, "Not for me." And I was like, so interesting, because so many people, as you said, both their identity and their patterns are so deeply rooted that it's almost this offensive pushback around anything that suggests that you could still achieve amazing things, build an incredible business and thrive without it being total exhaustion and, the slaving yourself. It has to be painful.
I also think, imagine if we're like, even though when we were younger, we had different type of energy, all of those things, but also imagine if we learnt these lessons when we were younger. How amazing. Well, actually, we even here, and I'm sure listening and watching, well, there would have been really different experiences in life in a positive way.
And the reflections to our children and our team members and all of those things of the lessons that we could have taught differently. I agree. It would be very fascinating. In your book, you share a number of different sort of frameworks or tools or ways that we can think about how to engage in this more healthy hustle. And you talk about the growth set point and 4 life cycles phases. And a little bit like the conversation we've just been having, I really like that realistic and honest portrayal of what it's like to run a business, and the fact that, well, actually, it's not even just to run a business, it's to be human, but that fact of cycles and different seasons or times of life. I was wondering if we start with those 2 frameworks, can you talk to us a little bit about this aspect of the growth set point that you talk about in the book and what that looks like for us as business leaders?
The growth set point is about when we're in business, like business never is a linear thing, right? There's ups and downs throughout. However, we reach a level of success of we achieved what we wanted to achieve, but we kind of either hit this stumbling point or this exhaustion point, or this opportunity for us to stand back and reflect. And we see that you have one of 3 different choices to make. You can talk about like, I just want to bury my head in the sand. I want to keep going. I know the systems aren't in place. I know I'm doing everything for everyone. I know I've got a team, but I just can't deal with it right now. When a business sort of starts to think, like owner goes, no, I can't deal with this, the business does go backwards because people start feeling less engaged. They're less motivated. If you are the core person in your business, the leader, people are going to pick up on your energy. If you're burnt out, if never got any time, if you're constantly saying, oh my God, I'm so busy, I don't have time for you, how can you retain staff? So that's what we don't want. But the other thing that we do see is sometimes a business just stagnates. So it's not about going backwards, but it's about, I'm just going to keep plodding along and hope for the best and, just kind of navigate my way through. But it's kind of, I'm a little bit like just going to keep doing it day in, day out without that, I guess, the empowerment and the motivation to step forward. And so a stagnating business, which just flatlines, eventually is going to drop. And what we're inviting our readers and listeners and people in our community to do is to consider, well, what is the future goal? Where do you want to be? Where is that? For some owners, it's around how do you get out of the business so that you can focus on what's next for me? How can you be creative again? Or what do you want to do in your life? And for some, it's around, well, I want to be out of the weeds. I want the strategic part, or I want the opportunity to go off and do something else, to be creative elsewhere. So we know that when you are in that mindset, that's when the processes and the blueprints that we put into the book can really drag you away from the weeds. It can help you have smart growth around how you progress in the business, and it can get you off juggle street, being everything to everyone, and really empowering your team to be at their peak. So peak performance is the goal there.
That's an interesting one too, Ness, because the fact that it is able to look different for different people, because I think, you talked through some of those pieces of you might be wanting a completely different end state to what I want or what, but some of these frameworks, it reminds me of, where is it? It's a little bit like Built to Sell, where like if you may not end up wanting to sell your business, but if you use the aspects in that book of like build it so you could sell it, it gives you that option. And then guess what? Now that the business is doing its own thing, you may not want to because you're like, oh, some of the examples you just gave, you might say, now I can go off and do this other project without the pressure of it having to generate revenue straight away. I can give myself a 2-year runway or whatever it is, right? So a little bit like when Nikki, you were talking about in researching, looking out there and there's kind of these extremes given, I'm always drawn to frameworks and tools that aren't just kind of cookie cutter of like, this is the answer, but it's saying use this framework, but make it something that is informed by knowing yourself and what you and your team are actually looking for, which, yeah. So sorry to interrupt you, Ness, but I just think it's
all good.
a really important distinction that is rarely actually covered in work that's put out there for us as leaders.
Absolutely. And I think the only additional thing I wanted to add to that is what we see is when you are focused on smart growth and you have, the systems and the processes for that, when you have high performance in your teams and for you, then that's where you get time freedom back. And I think that the flip around what we noticed is you cannot get time freedom without those other two things happening in your business. So a lot of people might focus on and rightly so, I need boundaries and I want to bring my time back. But if you're in that space without the structure to set your team up to succeed and without the strategy to progress your business, then they're left floundering and your business will do one of the other two things, stagnate or go backwards. So it's a really important piece around focusing on getting the business where it needs to be, your team where they need to be, so that you and them have the time freedom to be able to focus on what matters the most.
Yeah, and it's interesting because one of the things when I was reading through some of those descriptions in that section, my mind went to one of my previous businesses that I founded and ran didn't exactly neatly fit into what you were describing because I had the time freedom and ability to live my life in the way I wanted in that season because that was when my kids were little and I used to take 10 weeks off. I took all school holidays off and I didn't think about work. But what allowed that to not be sustainable was that I was really good at selling big projects. So there was always enough buffer to carry through those periods when I wasn't there. But no one else was actually selling or progressing the next piece. And it's a little bit ties back to that piece I said before of when I was energized by that, it didn't bother me. And I was happy to be the person who then came back and felt on fire and could sell the next big thing. But when I look at the long-term sustainability of those types of models, I never want to build a business like that again, because when you then have a season where you go, actually, I don't feel like, while I now am energized, I want to write a book or I want to do this, that means suddenly there isn't that underlying infrastructure and foundation that it can keep going regardless of how extraordinary your team is. So some people might be kind of going, oh, I'm different or I don't fit that category. I get that. And I definitely have had seasons of my businesses that are slightly different. But I think if we always come back to, was that long-term sustainable? Did that, serve you in different seasons? Not really, is the honest.
Because there was still that pressure on you as the golden goose in the business.
Yeah, which at that age and stage of life, I actually liked, that was fun. But now, no way. Yeah, that's really great. And maybe, Nikki, do you want to talk us through the 4 life cycle phases and what they kind of look like as a framework?
Yeah, so the 4 phases of smart business growth really start with crisis. So you might find that the business is in crisis mode. There's this sense of you're running off fumes, you're exhausted, you feel like it's just chaotic. We talk about being on Juggle Street, all things to all people, getting pulled in a million different directions. You're really stuck. Now, when Ness said, there's some things that need to be in place before we can get time freedom in terms of that growing business, and obviously the caveat being different types of businesses. But this is where there's no space or grace or time or anything to even look at it, because you are just stuck in crisis mode. Then you move to build phase. So build phase is you're starting to get some of the systems and structure in place. For example, you've got overarching goals. You might know what your goals are, but maybe your team don't know what they are yet. The business is running when you're in the business doing the do, just like the example that you gave. But if you're out of the business, then the money's not coming in. Maybe the team slack off a bit. It's sort of, you're certainly building something, but there's still a lot more part. I think about laying pavements on a path. So you've still got to keep and bringing people along the way. Then you get to growth phase. So growth phase is awesome. And growth phase is that your business is growing, your team are on board, how you're all moving to one overarching a goal and objective. However, the danger zone here is that this is where we can fall into a good enough mentality. There's so much opportunity to do things better. There's so much growth opportunity. You're still in the busy trap and on Juggle Street, but you might be getting a little bit more time freedom, but it's good enough. So actually changing can feel a bit scarier or harder than staying the same.
It feels risky. Yeah.
It feels
now
risky.
You've got something to lose. Yeah.
You do have something to lose. Exactly. So, and I mean, there's been books that are written titled "Good is the Enemy of Great." So that's really what we need to think about here in growth phase. And then we've got momentum. And momentum is when, the team is stepping up so you can step back. What came to mind when you were talking, Bessi, about that previous business is it's like when people rely on motivation. We can't rely on motivation and how we feel in business. If it's a bonus that, yes, you want to do that and you want to do those kinds of things, amazing. But if your business relies on it, it's a business at risk, full stop. Whether you love it, want it that way or not, because things can happen. So momentum is you can step back. There's optimal energy. The team are performing. There's peak performance in the business. There's smart growth. But I think what's important to remember here as well is that it's not like you get to momentum, we're done. Right, that's it.
Or even you gave a great example with a couple that you worked with where they were being honest and saying when they looked at the business, different parts of the business might be sitting in different spaces, which is no different to our lives, where you might be going, I know that when my kids are all big now, but when they were little, the moment I got cocky and was like, oh, I am the best parent ever, look at our routine, and this was exactly when they would, something would growth spurt or something would change and I would be crying and a disaster, so it's a little bit like that. As you said, we don't just move through it and now I have reached enlightenment and I sit forever in momentum.
That's it. I need to do no more.
But it also shouldn't, but that's not realistic. So don't worry, it's all good.
Yeah. And we're going to, and so that's why, this is a process we think is really important to connect in with a minimum every 6 months. This could be a part of your quarterly, 6-monthly review or check-in, because it's really about understanding overall, where am I at? What phase am I at? And there's valid reasons that could bring us back to growth or back to build or even to crisis. And like you said, in different areas, the point here is we need to have awareness, because when we have awareness, then we can put a plan in place. We can create a strategy. We can make the decisions around what actually needs to happen, and then it doesn't turn into
intentionally and not like what Ness was saying before. If we're not just doing the head in the sand of like ignore it, we're saying okay.
Exactly.
Because the other thing is, and I think this will probably come up a few times in our conversation, the other thing is related to these different seasons of life or where we happen to be at. Sometimes you actually can intentionally choose, I don't want to be scaling or massive or bringing on more people or new clients yet. So I know, for example, in the season that I'm in, when we were doing planning for this year, where at first we were kind of ramping and looking at, oh, how do we hit this target and get this many clients? And when I sat down and went, what's the phase of life I'm in? What are the requirements of the things that are most important to me? I only have 2 priorities, this little family of mine and the work that I'm doing in building a legacy out with my business. But the season that I'm in, I actually went, oh, energetically, if I look at the clients I already have in the mix, I only want a maximum of 6 more of those in 25. Like, I don't actually want in this season to have massive amounts of people I'm directly working with. And so it's those intentional decisions of I'm still honest with myself about the legacy and the vision I have for the business, but that's why I do the podcast and that's why we're ramping up the YouTube channel. Like, I can share those ideas without having to energetically work with hundreds or thousands of people, right? So there's these things are also, there's not a right or wrong. Like, you must always be trying to scale and reach 9 figures. It doesn't have to be that is the goal.
I think also with that, sometimes, if we get sucked into the messaging out there, particularly on social media around everybody should be striving for the $1 million and all that. Well, great, but what's your profitability? Because if your profitability
Exactly. Are we even focusing on the
sucks,
right thing? Yeah.
if you have $1 million turnover and $980,000 in expenses, that is not a profitable business. And so one of the parts of our True North framework is to start with, what is the vision of your business? So exactly as you said, Bessie, it's what's important to you, the legacy you want to leave, the impact you want to make. And then we need to tie that into, well, if I'm doing that, how does that actually flow onto my personal vision? How does my work enrich my lifestyle and the experience of life that I have, rather than sucking it dry and just being all focused on work? So we really believe that in any planning that happens in business, we always have prioritized life as just as an important KPI, if you like, than business growth, managing your money well and peak performance. Because when we don't prioritize that, we can have this amazing business and then we turn around and go, who are the people that matter the most to me? Oh, they're not there.
So true. I think that is a beautiful connector also back to this idea of long-term sustainability, because the ways that we operated when we were younger, maybe if we were a few decades ago and you were going to retire at 50, die 18 months later of a heart attack, maybe that would be great and fine and a good use of your life. But all of the leaders that I work with are in that category where they want to still be doing energizing, meaningful work in their 80s. And so my point to, there's a few extraordinary people I'm working with at the moment where they're pushing really hard. And I've actually said, I think you really need to just slow down in this next few years. There's some critical pieces we can put in place that mean you will be coming into your own and on fire in your 70s. I mean, look at extraordinary people like Jane Fonda and people in their 85, for goodness sake. It's like, if we take that, shift our time frame of everything being urgent and quarterly numbers and whatever, and said, no, we do have that, whether it's the North Star or the vision or whatever language you use, if you're clear on that, one of the reasons why I have in this season been able to go, oh, the next 3 years isn't actually about me rapidly scaling and growing something. I'm actually doing a shrinking phase. And that's on purpose. But in that, I will be intentional of the foundations I build, ready to then ramp it up when the time is right. And I think time frame is really critical when we think about this. Again, we're not trying to change our total personalities. And I know that in your book, you talk about DISC and different assessments and that aspect of knowing ourselves and our team. And I think that's probably a really nice segue into these elements of knowing the team and yourself, so that when one of the great pieces you talk about related to stress and what's, the ongoing aspects of that, what that looks like. It's hard to interact with that unless you do know yourself and your team well. And so I'm wondering, that comes up quite a bit when you talk about the Thrive business model, when you move us in the book through to the stage of like, well, how are we actually going to get back to that place we talked about of the distinction between beautiful chaos and destructive chaos? So you said in the book, it's time to learn the blueprint for having a thriving business. A pivotal point is understanding what beautiful chaos and destructive chaos is in business and the impact that each has on positive, negative, and chronic stress. I'm wondering if you can break down that the Thrive business model for us and talk us through. You've already touched on some of the elements related to smart growth and some of those ideas. But I think for people, as we have this conversation, if we can dig into the really practical elements that are in the book, I think we'll be able to tempt them to read it.
Looking at the Thrive business model, there's 3 key areas that we talk about, and we have alluded and talked to some already today. So we have to focus on smart business growth, which we've touched on. Just to break it down really simply, to have smart business growth, you need to have 3 key areas that you're focusing on. Your plan, which, as we talked about, includes a business plan or a business focus, and prioritizing life equally. Now, if that's quarterly, half yearly, monthly, like again, you make the rules around this, but you have to have clarity of direction. So a plan, a focus on sales, and equally a focus on profit. So we already touched on that. You've got a clarity of direction, you're focusing on sales and equally profit. That is the formula to make sure you've got smart growth in your business. Peak performance is the other one. So we mentioned that, we talk about people feeling like they're on Juggle Street. And the opposite of that, where we want you to get to instead, is a place of peak performance. And again, I'll just break it down, 3 key areas you need to focus on to get peak performance. So if you're listening and watching this, I really want you to think about, okay, do I have clarity of direction? Am I focusing on sales and profit? Great. In terms of peak performance, is there an intentional focus on culture and the culture that I'm creating? Even if you have a small team, even if it's just yourself, or if you have a huge team, what is the culture and how am I intentionally impacting that? What are the operating rhythms in the business? Is there clarity of expectations? Are there cadences of coaching? Is there regular meetings and touch points? So operating rhythms, that's the type of thing. And we do go in a little bit more detail in the book, of course.
Which you should pick up a copy of. Healthy Hustle.
I'm going to put mine up.
We will share all the links so people can grab it.
Oh, so good. So you're thinking, am I intentionally driving and creating my culture? Do I have clear operating rhythms in place? And am I proactively focusing on upscaling my team? Because when you have the right culture, good operating rhythms, and a focus on upskilling, that is when peak performance happens in your business. And that means that you can actually step back and focus on all those cool things that we talked about. Now, when you have those 2 key areas or those 6 checkpoints, and I know you're playing along with me, this is when you can really then start to lean into, we want you to get out of busy trap and to that place of time freedom. And that's that 3rd part of the Thrive business model. The 3 key areas you need to focus on: mindset. What are my beliefs around time, energy, my strengths, people, like everything? And again, we go through beliefs throughout the entire book in different sections. What are my energy, and within that, my energy and my boundaries? So how am I managing my energy? In the TEDx talk, I talk about energy gainers, things that give us energy, and energy drainers, things that take away energy. And what are the boundaries around that? And then, of course, drivers. So you talked about DISC. We touch on that. And there's so many different behavioral profiling. But the ultimate idea here is, am I actually working to my natural strengths? And am I aware of my areas of growth? And are my team? So which is an important distinction. We don't stop at just us. Never. Reflect self first and then out to team. So mindset, energy, and drivers. They are the 3 essential ingredients to move to time freedom.
On that aspect where you were sort of tapping into some of the stress elements, the positive stress versus negative stress, I don't know if you've read yet, but Martha Beck's new book, Beyond Anxiety.
No. Okay. Writing that one down.
It has lots of tags as well. Great book. Beyond Anxiety, Curiosity, Creativity, and Finding Your Life's Purpose. A lot of the elements when I was reading in your book, I was like, oh, there's such a beautiful connection to a lot of her work around these elements of that prolonged stress and what it does to our body. And you give this example, and I know for anyone who's a big reader, they will have seen this in lots of different places, but this idea that if you stay, so Martha Beck talks about it related to creativity, whether for you that might be painting or cooking or gardening, like it can be as basic, it doesn't have to mean you're artistic, but she talks about that element of when your brain flips into that creativity, it's not possible to be anxious at the same time. And you give some different examples like that with stress in the book that part of what we're trying to find as we equip ourselves is to go, okay, if I'm going into a spiral of something that is deeply unhelpful and is putting me in that space of negative stress, what are some quick reframes or ways to shift gears? Because it's natural, we are going to fall into that, but we don't want to stay there. And I think, there's some really good elements in your book. And as I said, have a read of Martha Beck's as well. You also touched on something there that made me think of Brad, my partner, used to always say to me that, because I would have this ridiculously long list that it was not humanly possible to get done. And he'd be like, that's probably like 6 months of work and you're pretending you're doing that today. Good luck. But he would always say to me, you're never going to be finished and you need to create artificial constraints or finish lines. Just make something up. So it's like, when I finish this bit, the day is finished. He's like, I know it's not. And that there's all these other things but part of when you are leading an organization, particularly if you own it, is that there will always be something you could do, but how do you come back to that space of setting your own constraints and finish lines? Because otherwise, as you said, you'll never, even if you put a bunch of the other frameworks in place, you'll never enjoy or embrace that time freedom element or the other aspects of your life, because you'll always be going, oh, but I could fix this or I could build that. Were there any other elements sort of that, as you've worked with people or you've got feedback from the book around people shifting into the really building out that Thrive business model, their particular stories or examples you wanted to share with us about what that can look like?
Wow, there's so many that are weaved through the book in relation to how it all kind of builds and brings it together. And I think probably the best story that comes to my mind is towards the end of the book, where we talk about Michelle and Douglas and their year away. So for them to be able to, they had a young family at a time, the business was established, they had a team, it was growing, successful on those counts of, the where they were at with their profit and all of that kind of thing. And then deciding, like, wouldn't it be great if we could just go and live in Spain for a year with the 4 children? And then thinking around, well, that couldn't happen because, we run a business, and then really challenging themselves to think about what are all the barriers and the blocks to us being able to do that. And there'll be one in there that says that, okay, this is a stupid idea. And when we look on it into the future, we'll go, that's all right. We didn't go, but we couldn't go because of this reason. And what they found was everything was obviously figure outable, and
Yep.
and that
Thanks, Marie.
actually, yeah, that's right. One of my favorite sayings, one of my favorite books. And everything was figure outable, and that they actually could plan to do this. And I think this is the key. They didn't just get up, pack their bags and go the next night. They followed processes that we talk about in relation to setting the business up to succeed, getting their team to a point where they weren't reliant on them, where they were empowered and they knew what to do, and having the structure and the systems in place for them to be able to make good decisions or decisions. And I always remember the quote that Michelle said around, we're not a life and death business. We're not in a hospital. We're not doctors. You can't break the business.
Yeah. And they gave that example, which a lot of people find when they go away and they're in a different time zone, is that being forced to, like, someone sends an email with a problem, but you're asleep, and by the time you wake up, they've fixed it. That's a really good position to put yourself in, because how quickly you realize that you're just jumping in too fast when, yes, there was an issue, but given the inability to contact you, they could figure it out themselves.
And they spent time setting up their team for that success, putting the systems and structure into place into the business to make sure that they, the things that were in their head were out of their head and in a process or a structure. Now, they didn't, I think they talked about, they did touch base back with the business at certain times.
Kept their finger on the pulse. They're not sort
That's
of.
right. Douglas came back a couple of times throughout the year. But what they really discovered at the end of it was the growth they experienced and the as a family it was equal to the growth that their team had experienced, and the beautiful growth that they saw in them over the year. So if anything, the fact, and it's a bit like what you said earlier, Bessie, around, when we have in our head that we're going to sell the business, we realize no one's going to buy a business if you've got to work 80 hours a week and it's all relying on you. Nobody. That's
It's
crazy.
literally worth zero. I've had to
Yeah.
have many of those awkward conversations with people, and it's like, oh, this isn't actually worth anything without you in it.
No, exactly. So it's that kind of thing around really looking at what is it that we need to do. And that's what I love about this story, is they shook it up. And it wasn't just a like, can I go away for a week on holidays and not be contactable? It was like a whole year. That's massive.
It's a good example, though, of, and you told the story in the book, which I was, probably this is too much information, but it makes me think of growing up in my mum and dad's bathroom. They had on the wall this little cartoon of the big rocks, little rocks, sand, like the example that you give.
How amazing.
So I always think of my mum and dad's toilet when I think of that scene. But anyway, when you told that story of the going away for a year, it also ties us back to this idea of, if we are really clear on what we want, but we're then realistic about timeframes, we can build towards that. And that's actually energizing and motivating in itself, like, because you're excitedly looking forward to, like, what this is going to make possible. And I think it's sort of a really great example of why that's important. It also is almost a cautionary tale, because the amount of people that I've worked with over the years where they are so trapped in this category where they say, oh, well, one day when I sell the business, or when I've paid off the mortgage, or when I get to this level of revenue, then I will ... with the things they want to do. How amazing. A little bit like our example before of, like, imagine if we knew these things when we were in our 20s. For this family, like, if they had put that off, the kids might have been bigger and not wanted to come with them, but also they would have missed the opportunity to have had these aha moments and realizations. And actually now, through their kids' entire childhood, they can run that business and operate very differently from a place of, they have evidence, not just assumptions, about what it's actually going to take to succeed in the way that is meaningful to them. So it's kind of that, not only is it a good teaching point on the elements that you spoke to, but I think it's the warning of, why wait and learn that in 15 years' time? Like, what is your version of that, and bring it forward to plan for it now, do the big rocks.
Yeah, and absolutely. This is a perfect example of how the business actually enhances your life. How having a like husband and wife running a business doesn't have to be that they're tethered to that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week forever. And it actually did enhance their life experience, and shook it up, shook it up to say, actually, if that's possible, what else is possible?
Maybe if we come back, there's lots of pieces that we've kind of touched on that I think will be helpful for people around even just that reflection of figuring out what it is they want. But if we circle back to some of these elements we've touched on a few times around, chapters, seasons, phases of life, there is this obsession that we've talked about that's out there, especially, yes, presented to us in social media, but not even that, just in mainstream media, of like the last 10 or 15 years, this rising obsession with entrepreneurship and like putting people on pedestals, and the glamorous aspects of what it looks like to have a unicorn business that you sell, and all of this stuff, this obsession with growth and what you talk about as the B word, the being busy. But that is not sustainable, and it's something that I think the types of people that you work with and that I work with really have to grapple with, because it is so entrenched in how we behave, and what that looks like. And I'm wondering if you can, maybe for those who haven't read the book yet, tell us some of the stories. It's fine if they're ones from the book, but that kind of give these examples of when that pattern is there, the drive and hustle, the unhealthy hustle, has been part of how you've operated. But we want to sit with these ideas and actually shift and change without completely changing our personality. Just, can you expand on, or kind of inspire us a little bit of what is possible with that?
Immediately, what comes for mind is one of our clients, James. So we started working with James about 5 years ago, and he was looking for a better way. He had young kids, a wife, a growing business, a very successful business again already, but he was tethered to his business, tethered to his phone. He couldn't sit down at the dinner table without having his phone with him. It was impacting all areas of his life. And he talks about, we had many conversations and coaching sessions around, I just feel like someone's waiting, like what's around the corner? Someone's waiting for me. Everybody wants a piece. And I want, incredibly driven man, very, very smart, cybersecurity, IT, MSP business. But he could see that it was costing his life, his family, his joy, his time, his sanity. And so when we started working together, and again, I think it's important, it's around defining and redefining what success is for you. So that's where he started. I'm really pleased to say that last year we sat down and had a bit of a review, and his business has grown 98% year on year over the last 5 years, with a profit increase. And again, already established business. So we're not talking about startup here. Now that's great. Awesome. I mean, good numbers, right? If that's what you're after, because success is the definition. But that wasn't the thing that we were most excited about. Genuinely, the thing that we were jumping up and down and celebrating and high-fiving was the fact that he no longer has his phone at the dinner table. He has breakfast with his wife. He goes go-karting with his son. He picks his girls up from school. These are the things where that mattered. That's the meaning. And I love this example because when I think about James's story, his experience, it is such a quintessential, amazing example of the revenue is there. The profit is growing. He's doubled the size of his team. He's got big, big plans. He's also, I was talking to him yesterday, talking about what his next is. What his, an offshoot business, consulting, this and that, the other. There is no way that he would be able to have these conversations, or more importantly, execute the conversation, or have the space. We're talking about this December, his plan is to have the whole month off so he can go to Europe with his family. He goes on holidays. I mean, whenever we talk about this stuff, so, in an audience, a workshop, or on stage, and we talk about having holidays, there's a ripple of laughter, what is that? Or a holiday where we actually switch off. We giggle at it. That's a problem. The fact that we're kind of laughing, that awkward laughter, oh, yeah, that's me. This indicates that there's a problem in our culture and our society around this. So again, that's one of the things that we were really celebrating with James. And I remember over the years, it was the little wins. It was, I had a week off and I didn't get called. Yes. Amazing. What's the next step?
Because they give you the confidence. It's like anything, isn't it? It's like you need those little steps to go, oh, it is safe to pop my head out a little bit more. We can't go from 0 to 100 with these things.
Yes. And it's relearning and unlearning. And we interviewed James on our podcast. It's a really good episode around where his beliefs came from, his experience with his dad when he was growing up. And his dad was a successful, inverted commas, businessman in all the traditional senses. But what did that, and James had that realization around, actually, I don't want my definition of success to be the same, and I don't want to pass that on to my kids, so I'm changing. I'm breaking the cycles I need to redefine success in a way that works for me as a family man. And again, I'm someone who doesn't have kids. So I do have 3 dogs though, and a wife. So I'm still the
There's demands.
Yes, I'm very lucky. And but my definition of success is of course different. Ness has 2 grown kids. Her definition of success is different. So there's a lot in there around people have done this. Stand on the giants who have gone before. You can do this. And there's different examples of different types of businesses that are doing this. And I believe that we as business leaders have a duty of care to create this change, because our teams are
and
looking
to model
at us.
it, as you said, because people are watching, and it's not just what we tell them to do.
Absolutely not. And there's different examples and scenarios. And if you don't have that see to believe, seek it out. Again, why it was so important for us to put real life stories in the book. Go there if you don't see people around you. Be aware of what are my examples of success around me right now, and does that need to change?
And it's that interesting thing too, isn't it, of with all of these elements of what we're being sold, in most instances we have unconsciously just taken those on as our beliefs or our images of what success looks like, or what running a business looks like, or what being a parent is. And it's the becoming more conscious of them. And as you said, depending what that answer is, for you, it may not be about, I often say to people, like my example before, do you actually want more clients this year? My answer is no. Okay, great. Well, then that would be a silly thing to chase, because you're going to then wonder why you're self-sabotaging it and not doing it. It's because you don't actually want, so it's the being conscious and naming those things, and allowing yourself to potentially be countercultural, to potentially be going against what other people want for you. I mean, one of the things when we talk about in your book, you talk about time and busyness, like that B word. And I always say to leaders, be prepared though, because people don't like it when you have a different relationship with time and busyness. So I, in the last few years, have been the least busy I've ever been in my adult life. And it's hilarious the amount of people who kind of can't accept that. So they'll still say, so when I'm not doing things out of choice, they go, I know you're really busy. I'm like, no, I'm actually not busy at all. I just, my only priority is like, I'm not doing that anymore. Not because I don't have time and I'm busy, but because it's not a priority for me. But people they won't accept that. It's like, no, you're too busy. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that wasn't what I said.
I love that. It's the conscious choice and owning it, and how, I can't wait for it to be the norm that we say, I'm not coming along to that thing, or I say no to this thing. And it's not the assumption because I'm so busy, but it's just, oh, cool, prioritizing life. Like, we can say no, we can prioritize ourselves and our time, but it's not the norm. It's not the norm right now.
No, and it really does make a lot of people uncomfortable.
Yes. Yes.
And I think, the story that we wrote in the book about James, who was a leader in a business, and his unraveling through coaching was a realization that he was actually hiding behind that as an excuse to not really do things. So he could say to his boss, oh, I'm really busy. That report's not done. Sorry about that. I'm so busy, which he created, because you've got to prove to yourself and others why you're so busy. And, when he really dug down into that, there were other issues that were really holding him back from progressing forward. And part of that was, the confidence to be able to do it, that imposter syndrome that we can feel in our lives at any various stage, especially as a new leader. And also to be able to go, well, actually, I don't really understand what you're asking of me. And if I could be clearer on that, then maybe the motivation would come. And to really question that, am I that busy? Like, what is it that's in place that makes me feel like I can hide behind this? And it was really brave of him, I think, to share that story, because and now, as a leader, he's just got such a different take on it. And people come to him and go, wow, how do you do it? Like, what is it that you've learned? How can you share that with me? Because he's very highly productive and loves what he does, and he's great at what he does. And in fact, I remember one of the sayings was like, his manager goes, well, you're just, I just know I can leave you and you'll just get it done. Like, not the problem child at all. Sometimes he's like, I can have some love too. Oh, still over here doing good things. Because we do focus that, that 80-20 rule, right? 20% of our team need 80% of our time. But imagine if we had 80% of our team being high performers.
Well, because that also goes back to that piece of, if we can do this work for ourselves, but then create a platform and encourage our team to do it. When you think about the amazing opportunity that opens up when, there are a lot of things that have to get done, but in the absence of empowering and equipping and training your team, it is you that has to do it, which means the bottleneck is there, and
It's
none
not
of it's going to get done well, right? Whereas
That's right.
those pieces, lately I've been, some of the posts I've done on social media, I've been talking about this element that I always say to people, you should charge the most for what you find the easiest to do, right? Because that's where your brilliance is. It's like your blink ability. Someone else goes, oh my goodness. And it's the same in that example that you just gave of, like, there are things that you go, I cannot think of anything worse, so I'm going to procrastinate, avoid it, not do it. there will be someone on your team who that is their dream day. And if you could lock them in a dark room and say, do nothing but this for the next 8 hours, they would go home on cloud 9. And it's like, we are projecting so many things and creating problems that don't even need to exist.
That's what I love about, the different stories that are woven through the book and the different models that we use, because that's where something like disc profiling can be so helpful to a leader in a team. It just shortcuts getting to know and understand people's natural strengths. And so that you do look at, we always say to our clients, it's like, are you working to your strengths? Or are you hiding behind them and perhaps not doing that? Because so many people focus on what they don't do well at the expense of what do I do well. And when we can work out that balance in the team around who's great naturally at doing this and who finds it, like, sometimes we've got to adapt, absolutely. But if we can set up people to work in their natural strengths, we're going to get the best out of them.
We've always done profiles. I'm obsessed. I've done like every profile known to
Yeah,
man.
me too.
We've always done profiles on our teams and different things. And one of my co-founders back in the day used to say to everyone, though, when we did it, he'd say, so this might be your natural preferences, but you are a professional and you are going to have to be competent at other things. So like, you can't do the, oh, well, I'm not a details person, so sorry, that was a piece of rubbish I just gave you. It's like, well, we have to work with that. But I agree with you. When you use these tools, not as a kind of excuse or avoidance tactic, but to really understand yourself and your team.
Yes.
I even, I'm very lucky, one of my sisters works with me, and I still, when I'm doing a massive brain dump, because I'm a big pictures, chaotic brain type person, and I will do these things that I find really energizing of like this and this and all this chaotic thing. But even though I've known her entire life, and even though I know all these profiles really well, I stop myself, and this is one of those things of like actually having practices in the way you operate. Before I get on a call with her, I will go back and reread her profile and then go, okay, probably not going to be helpful if I use that word or this piece. And maybe I'll take that off and I'll talk about it related to her doing, so it's that whole piece of, by stopping and connecting it into people's strengths and brilliances, not only do you allow them to step more fully into their own capability, but you'll get a better outcome without you having to do it. So it's all those pieces that they're all just examples of actually, it's not enough to just read a book or, be interested in a certain profiling tool. It's how are you then consistently putting those to practice in the way you operate and lead.
Definitely. I think Ness and I have similar experiences with that, with each other, because we also make up, from a disc point of view, all 4 quadrants. I think the other thing around this,
I would be curious to see your disc profiles.
Yes, well, we're all of them. Between the two of us, we're disc. We are disc.
I love it. I remember when I did my disc, I think the woman said, "You're a blazing D. I've never seen anyone so off the charts over there." It's like quite funny. But yeah.
And you're like, thank you. Thank you very much.
But on that, like to your point, one of the things she was really good at getting me to do, which I still do, even in like personal text messages, is I will write a message and then I'll take what I wrote at the end and I'll cut it and paste it at the top because I'm like, be a human. Okay.
Yeah.
What would I do if I was a human? I have to ask myself that question many times.
This is that know thyself and then know others and know how to adapt our communication style. I similar. But I also think, to your point, which is such an important point, this isn't about letting ourselves off the hook. I'm not a details person, which, trust me, I would love that. When we know this, we can support our team better. So if they're not a details person, how are we, but they still need to do, say, reporting. I mean, I remember when I was sales director in a startup, but the startup was in corporate, and I had to work on contracts and such detailed stuff, but I had strategies. Weirdly, or maybe not weirdly, things like if I wore jeans and Connies and like casual clothes, I could be more analytical. So that's at a certain time of day. Like if it was more in the morning, I have more energy. So what are the strategies? There's always strategies that we can use. It's like when some people don't like doing presentations if they suit up. or put makeup on, like, or put heels
Yeah.
on. It's like that false
Yeah.
confidence.
Figure out what for you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And if we as leaders can know our team, then we know how we can support it. Maybe they need extra cave time. Maybe they need some coaching around their presentation skills. Maybe they need a buddy system. Maybe it's about time of day, more accountability. There's so many ways that we can help people achieve what they need to
Yeah.
and stretch into their stretch zones, with
Yeah.
their growth zones, their areas of growth and opportunity.
And that same piece for them that we just talked about as for us as the leader is saying to them, you need to know your team as well. And like, where is there something where it would actually be better if you partnered up with this person who has complementary skills and do it collectively? Like, there's a lot of pieces now with different evidence around even how we incentivize people and how, depending on the type of business and the work you do, it can be more effective to incentivize or have bonuses for a team, not an individual, because it's this whole bit of how are we working together? And let's actually be realistic of what it took collectively to win. And what does that look like? And I think whether it's to do with time or strength or any of these pieces, always doing the dual thing of understanding yourself, understanding others, and then going, how do we get the outcome we want here collectively?
Definitely. A really good definition of high performance, which we can overlay with peak performance as well. This is a model from Andy Meikle, who interviewed many, many people from successful high performers in many different areas, musicians, the Dalai Lama, business people, all sorts. We use this model consistently in our business and with our clients. 70% of success comes from results. No surprise, we can pull a report on it. It's KPIs, it's dashboards, like what are the results in the business? 20% of high performance comes down to being a person of influence within the team. How am I giving back? How am I supporting my fellow colleagues? How am I leading by example? And then 10% comes down to being a person of grace. How am I managing my own emotions? I like to look at it like influence is sort of what we're doing externally, and grace is how I'm managing internally. Am I throwing my toys out of the cot for everybody to see, being a plum, a polylod me, whinging, creating drama, or am I removing myself from situations? Am I managing my emotions in a resourceful way? And I think that that fits beautifully with what we're talking about with the team acknowledgement, because I mean, I've had so much experience in sales teams and sales. So this whole team incentive, we always did team incentives because it actually weeded out different types of energy and approaches around it's just me, win at all cost.
Which often those approaches end up damaging the broader company, because it's like, well, hang on, by you not supporting the team over here or trying to push a customer into buying this piece, which actually long-term meant that they were not a customer for a long period because you just got the quick sale. It's all of these things of how are we incentivizing the right behavior? And I agree with you. I think there's that zooming out, which really goes to the heart of today's conversation. So much of this is asking us as leaders to pause long enough to reflect, to ask those questions and be intentional in the way we lead. I'm wondering, as we sort of wrap things up, what have I missed that you feel is like an essential element of the message and what you're trying to share? What do we need to hear from you that we haven't talked about yet?
That's a great question. We've covered so much ground.
We have covered so much. Where my mind goes to, and this is just, I think, at the core of what this healthy hustle is about. There's an amazing poem by poet Mary Oliver. And there's a line in that, what will you do with this one precious life that you have? And that's a question I want to ask of everybody that's listening and watching, because what do you want with this one precious life? Do you want to be caught up in this crazy cycle of chaos, busy and juggling? Or will you make intentional, conscious decisions around how you're growing your business, how you're supporting your team, and how you're living your life? I think that's probably just a lasting question that I really encourage everybody to lean into and think, because it's going to make you either feel really uncomfortable and a little bit sick in the tummy or clench your butt, which means that you need to change things.
Like Ness said, in doing that exercise, like your clients who went away for a year, or I've done this at many points in my life when I've felt sorry for myself or gone, if I had this, and then I sit down and go, well, what are the things I want to do? When you actually do that list, very rarely is there a deal breaker that means you couldn't do it now. So there's also that opportunity of, you may be surprised that you've been making excuses and saying something's not possible. That's actually very possible. And you just got to do that time frame piece we talked about, the big rocks.
Absolutely. I think that's a really powerful end to, I couldn't top that.
Well, you told one of the stories that kind of inspired that. So, you're part of that one. And where is the best place for people to learn more about your work and to buy the book? Where should people go?
Well, healthyhustle.com.au is where you can go to buy the book. We actually have, Nikki, tell me if this is right. On that page, if you want to just download chapter 1 and just get a little taster, you're able to do that as well for free. But if you want to jump in, see all the models, go deeper into what we've discussed today, then you can purchase a book there.
And I would just say, but while you're on that, before you go to the where else to find you, one of the things for people, if you're kind of feeling like, I don't need another theoretical heavy read or book that's not practical, we said this at the beginning, while it covers a lot, it's very readable, but there's also, you guys have done a great job of both in the book physically, but then the downloads of the worksheets and the things to do. So it is practical and it's driving you to now implement that. None of us here are trying to encourage people to just, let's learn another useless idea. It's absolutely about how that can change your life and your business.
Yeah. It's that quote around knowledge isn't power. It's what you do with the knowledge that's powerful. So, so definitely get your hands on that. And we live in LinkedIn. So that's where we love to hang out. We love to connect with people there. And any other way, Nikki, that comes to mind?
Well, I would also just say we've got a link to a really super quick online survey for the 4 phases of smart growth. That's another cool thing that you can do. But I agree, it's don't just let this be a cool time that you spent listening to us chatter away. Like, what's one thing that you can do to actually take some action? Because it's the 1%. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be big action. Just action one little thing and you will eventually start to change the ways of working.
That's so true. And I'll tell one last story on that. So I have, like most people, things that I avoid and procrastinate on doing.
No, really?
The Eastern traditions used to always talk about that human thing of denial and avoidance. We're all good at it. But I've had this task that has been on my list, I'm not exaggerating, for 5 months that I haven't done. And to your point of like, sometimes it's just the 1% piece. So I think it was yesterday or the day before, I was really tired and I had a ridiculously long list. And I said to Brad, I just want to go to bed. But okay, I won't do all of the things, but I might pick, and I can't remember what number I said, but it was still too high. And he said, do 2 and then go to bed. And I was like, 2? Anyway, so I picked 2, one of which was this thing I'd been putting off for 5 months, and I did it. And it's that hilarious thing of yesterday when I was thinking about it, I was like, isn't that ridiculous that in thinking I was being productive and like, I can't possibly do 2 things, I have to do all these things. I didn't do it for 5 months. And then the moment you gave me permission, like, how ridiculous. I know all these things. Like, we all do it.
I think that's another really important message of our conversation today. This is not rocket science. It's simple. Don't beat yourself up about anything, because be kind to yourself is a really important starting point. And simple, it doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be complicated, but we build it up in our minds. How often do we have a task, we do it and go, oh my gosh, that was so quick and easy. Why was it there for 5 months?
Absolutely.
I could have just done that in 2 seconds.
I know.
But it is the stories we tell ourselves. It's the trap. So just bring it down. Simplicity, 1 or 2 things. Love it.
So so today I've still got one more thing that I've been avoiding, which Jana, who I mentioned before, my sister, texted me this morning. I won't say what the thing is, saying, have you done this yet?
Yeah.
And I said, where is it? I said, nope, it's still on the list. Today's the day, baby. And she wrote back, I'll believe it when I see it. How dare you? So I am today. I've had my interview with you, and that will be my second thing, Jana, and I will do it today.
Right.
I love
and
it.
And then go to bed.
Yeah. Something like that.
Bit of bribery, self-bribery.
Exactly. Or have chocolate or something.
Yes, why not?
Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time. I know what an epic task it is to kind of boil down all of these things that you've been doing for decades, but great book. And thank you so much for your time today to share that with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.